So back to the basics. We hear that phrase all too often, particularly when we find ourselves or someone else straying from the basics, the proven foundations that we use as the basis for what we do. Someone once told me if you can't do the basics like blocking and tackling in football, you aren't going to get far down the field. And so we can't forget those basics in performance enhancement, the building blocks, the fundamentals, or the pillars of performance. That's your strength, your balance, your flexibility. And of course, there's a lot more to performance than just those three, but they really do have a pretty important influence on what we can do beyond those basics. But sometimes, particularly today, these basics are kind of passed over. I think a lot of people want immediate gratification. They don't want to spend time on the basics. They don't see the value sometimes. They want the quick fixes. They don't like basic or plain things. They go for the sexy clickbait, the things they can post quickly on Snapchat or TikTok or Instagram. And then there's those crazy trends out there where people are out there doing things without really understanding the science, like doing bench presses on exercise balls, when we know through research that our force is decreased up to 70% when you try to do strengthening on an unstable surface like a ball. So why are they trying to build strength in a situation that doesn't give you the ability to produce strength? So it just seems like we've strayed from the basics. We've tried to hack our way to improving performance without really paying attention to the foundations that got us where we are today. We've forgotten the science. And that's why I've asked my good friend, Dr. Behm. He's a professor in exercise science at Memorial University in St. John's. That's in Newfoundland, Canada. He is one of probably the most prolific researchers I know, with over 300 scientific publications, an internationally renowned expert in strength and flexibility and balance, those key pillars, the science behind them. And he's even given a TED talk on stretching. So he's obviously pretty knowledgeable at what he does. He's literally the source that we go to for the basics. He knows everything we need to get us through those fundamentals to bring us to the next level. So I just appreciate you being here, Dave, and thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks much, Phil.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role as a sports scientist, if you will.
All right. Well, if we go back, of course, you want to have a passion for something. And as a kid, as a youngster, a young adult, I was quite athletic, and I played baseball and football and hockey. And in fact, I was even drafted into the Canadian Football League. It's not the National Football League, but it's still a professional football league, a pretty good league. And didn't last very long. I only lasted the training camp. And so I developed a passion for wondering, because I really wanted to be a professional athlete, whether it was hockey or football or whatever. And then I got close, but I didn't make it. So that was always digging inside me and wondering, why didn't I have it? And one of the problems was that I didn't have this burning speed. I was a running back, but I wasn't that fast. So it doesn't work out well when you don't run fast and you're a running back. So I was always wondering, how could I get faster? And so one of my first areas that I looked into was the velocity specificity of resistance training. How could I run faster? And then, of course, since I didn't make it, then if I do the research, how can I make sure that other people can run faster or become more powerful? And that's kind of targeted my research through the years. If I have a question, I walk into a weight room, let's say back in the late 90s, and they'll have Swiss balls. Nobody had seen Swiss balls before in a weight room. And I was wondering, well, do they really work? So I spent the next 10 or 15 years researching Swiss balls. And then maybe 5-6 years ago, I walk in the weight room and these people are rolling on these rolls. And I'm going, what's going on with this stuff? Does it work? And of course, everybody's advertising that it works, but you don't know if it really works. So then I spent the last 5 or 7 years looking at roller massagers and foam rollers. So I've always been piqued by these trends that are in the weight room that you go in decade by decade. And some of them, actually do work and are effective. And some of them are just money-making schemes. So it's really important, like you say, to get to the basics and see, there are progressions and then there are tangents, and which ones actually work. And that's kind of been my focus for the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I think you and I hit it off pretty well at the very beginning. It's this natural question of, just because you're using it, does that mean it works? And I know that things like, I remember one of the first studies that I ever saw was one of your papers on the specificity of velocity training with elastic resistance. I think that's that picture of you playing tennis. You remember that?
Yes, yeah.
So back in 1991, you were publishing those articles on performance back in those days. And as you build up to, you were talking about the velocity, you're talking about the trends like the balls and the rollers. But back to, those are great, I think, vehicles to get us to the basics, right? So it's okay to find these things that might get us there a little bit faster, maybe more efficiently. But let's talk a little bit about the strength, the flexibility, and balance. And why do you think those are so important? Those three areas, why are those basic building blocks so important to athletic performance?
Oh, it's pretty obvious. When you think of strength, of course, you think of your force output. And if you go back to the physics, force is equal to mass times acceleration. Think of any sport other than, I don't know, I'm going to try and think of a sport that you wouldn't have much mass and acceleration. Darts. Maybe darts. You don't have to do a lot of strength training. But if you're playing a sport, you're playing football, soccer, hockey, baseball. Look at the size of baseball players these days. They are so much larger than they were back in the 1960s. Same with hockey players. I've seen statistics where most people, if you're a hockey fan, would know the name Gordie Howe, one of the best players ever. He was 6'1", 6 feet tall, and about 205 pounds. He was the third biggest player in the NHL in the 1960s. Now, 19-year-olds come into the NHL are bigger than he is. The average NHL draftee is over 6'1" and weighs 195 pounds at 18 years old. Mm-hmm. So these people are huge. So you've got these larger masses, and these people are working on their strength. So they're moving forces at a high acceleration. That's why you have weight categories in combat sports, because you can't have Mike Tyson at 220 pounds, or Lennox Lewis, or any of the newer guys fighting a featherweight. No matter how fast, how you can accelerate, the guy with the greater strength and the greater force, or the woman with the greater strength and greater force, is going to win that battle. Now, if you weigh naturally 150 pounds, it's pretty hard for you to make it up to 225 pounds. But still, within your purview, within your own genetics, you can increase your strength, you can increase your force. And like you mentioned with velocity specificity, we can increase our power. So you need that in order to hit a ball, to hit a person, to kick a ball, to sprint down the field. All these things are based on your force and moving a mass at a high acceleration. So without that, you can look at, again, being a Canadian, I tend to look at hockey, but most people have heard of Wayne Gretzky, the greatest goal scorer ever. He wasn't a very big guy. His expertise or his competence was based more on his ability to be agile and read the opponent. But not everybody is a Wayne Gretzky and can get away with not being as strong as possible. And maybe he was as strong as he could possibly be, but he relied more on his finesse. But most of us, we need to add. And of course, he was very fast too, so he still had acceleration for his mass. So that's really important. And like you mentioned, when it comes to balance, well, if you don't have balance, you can't exert those forces. Just imagine if you are doing a tennis service and you have to do it on one foot on your tippy toes. You're not going to hit the ball very hard because you've lost your balance, you've lost your stability, so you can't exert forces. You can't move the forces up your kinetic chain and then accelerate your arm to hit the ball very hard. Or if you're going to punch somebody in the head, try and do it on one leg on your toes. Again, you're not going to hurt many people doing that. Again, your forces are low. And then if we want to get to summate those forces, we need greater range of motion. So again, imagine a pitcher who's only allowed to throw from this position and go like that. We're not going to get much acceleration or velocity on the ball. Tennis players, again, if they could only serve like this, again, what's going to happen? You need that full range of motion, whether it's tennis, it's baseball, When you're sprinting, if your feet were going like this all the time, instead of hip flexion high and getting down, again, you wouldn't get any speed. So you need that range of motion. Now, you don't need to always be like as flexible as a gymnast. If you're a long distance runner, you need a functional range of motion. And that's going to be different than a gymnast or a figure skater, but you still need a particular range of motion. So those three, the strength, the balance, the flexibility, they're crucial for performance.
And it was great. I always learned so much stuff when I talked to you. What you brought it back to was force. That's the ultimate building block, is force, the ability to produce force. And then when you apply that with, applying it to strength and then balance, and that was just an amazing statement of how those three play into producing force. And as I was listening to you, I remember the you can't fire a cannon in a canoe analogy that you taught me. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because that's a really important point I want people to pick up on.
Yeah, it's too bad I don't have the cartoon here, but I have a cartoon in my presentation I often make when I do a stability presentation. And it's a picture of two guys in a canoe dressed up as pirates. And there's this great big cannon sitting in the canoe. And I say to them, to the crowd, typically, I say, can you imagine if they fired that cannon, what would happen to the canoe? Obviously, the reaction would be that the canoe would be thrown into the water. These guys would drown. It would be ineffective. And then my next picture is always a picture of a large warship. And there's a great big cannon on the warship being fired. And I say, now this is a canoe. This is a large base, stable base. And if you've got a large, stable base, you can fire off these big cannons. And then, of course, if we make that towards ourselves, then we're the ship. And these are our cannons. And we can't fire these cannons, whether it's throwing a football, a baseball, throwing a punch, blocking or whatever. We can't fire our cannons unless we've got a big ship. And the big ship is through the chest, through the pelvis, through the legs. Without that big, stable ship, our cannons are useless.
Yeah, great analogy. I loved talking about that. So if we know that strength, balance, flexibility are so important, what should we be focusing on to kind of make sure that we're training these correctly, that we're peaking, improving? What are our keys for those three areas that we need to look at?
Well, it sounds like a simple question, but it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Because you got, again, another term I like to use in my presentations is a Goldilocks zone. All right. So I'm 64 years old. My Goldilocks zone now is far different than my Goldilocks zone when I was 22 years old. Like I mentioned, I want to be a professional football player. So what I wanted to do then was to have the maximum strength, the maximum power, the maximum hypertrophy that I could get at that time to get into professional football or professional hockey. Worked hard at it, didn't quite make it. I'm now 64 years old. Nobody wants me as an athlete. I'm out there for my fitness and my health. My goal now is to try and live at least another 30 years. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to do that by staying healthy. And I don't need to bench press 350 pounds anymore. I don't need to squat over 500 pounds anymore like I did when I was 22 to stay healthy. So how do we maintain that? Well, obviously, if I'm a professional football player, I'm going to have a program that is going to provide the optimal amount of stress on the muscles. In order for the muscles to grow, I need to have protein degradation. I got to break down protein in my muscles. And then, of course, you have what's called supercompensation. So the muscles are going to react to that protein breakdown and get bigger and stronger. That's why, for instance, when the typical strength training program is, work out 3 times a week, give yourself a day in between, do 3 sets of 10 or 12. So a guy named Delorme, American military guy, was looking in World War II, what's the best way for these military guys to get their strength and endurance? And he's the one that came up with this 3 sets of 8 to 12, workout every second day. So you got to work out every second day in order to give your muscles time to overcompensate. But again, that's if you're 22 years old or 30 years old. I'm 64 years old. it takes me longer to recover from something like that. So for somebody like me, if I had a really hard workout, I should be taking 72 hours off, maybe even more. So you see people working out every day, but they don't work out the same muscles every day if they know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what I'm doing these days. One of the big trends on the internet is the 100 push-ups a day. And people think, oh, okay, this is one of these stupid trends again. Well, again, for myself, I do about 100 push-ups a day. I do like 60 in a row, and I give myself a rest, and I do 30 or 40 in a row. And that's all I do, plus some chin-ups. All I want to do is stay healthy. My body hasn't changed much in the last year with COVID because I haven't gone to a weight room, and all I'm doing is 100 push-ups a day. Now, I'm sure if I go back into the weight room and I do my bench press, my maximum bench press will be down. But when I take off my clothes, and you wouldn't want to see it, but if I take off my clothes, my pecs and my deltoids don't look a lot different than they did a year ago before COVID, because 100 push-ups a day do it for me. But I would not recommend 100 push-ups a day for some woman or man who wants to get hypertrophy and much more strength. You're going to have to, give yourself greater intensity. So I know it's a long answer, but the answer is, who are you and what are your goals? And that will determine what are the basics. But okay, I'll stop there.
No, you don't have to stop. But I like talking about things like, where did 3 sets of 10 come from? And, and why are we still doing 3 sets of 10? And like you said, why is it every other day? Those all make sense. And then sometimes, as I was saying, sometimes we get away from the fundamentals, the basics, because somebody just said it and didn't really research it. And now we know through research, there's a lot of good to some of the basics that we used to do. But I think that there's never a one size fits all, right? That was your Goldilocks comment, is that
exactly.
We can't give 3 sets of 10 to everybody. Just, it's a good starting point. That's a general answer. But at the end of the day, we need to be very cognizant of a lot of different factors in exercise dosing. The goals, not just the goals of the individual, but the recovery is such an important. And I've seen the same thing as I've gotten older, that it takes a little bit longer to recover. And that brings up the dose response question that's really a bane to some existence of some of these, not just in sports, but in physical therapy, where we'll just apply this 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 15, and we won't really use an adequate dose to see the results that we need to. Can we talk a little bit about dose response in those areas? What do we know about the dose response of strength, flexibility, and balance?
Sure. Well, one of the interesting things is that I did my PhD at McGill University, and it was a school of physical and occupational therapy. Now, I'm not a physical therapist, but obviously being in that arena, one might say, I did learn a bit about physical therapy and treatment. And in the 90s, there was a number of articles out that found that, and physical therapists hated this, that physical therapy didn't work. And they're going, my God, this is our profession. And this research is saying physical therapy doesn't work. It was because of the dose response. Mm-hmm. So again, 22-year-old average person is given 3 sets of 10 every second day for every muscle group. But if you're injured, again, if you're going to give a certain dose, like a dose that you give to the average healthy individual, the injured individual is going to take longer to recover. So they were giving what we would expect to be a light load to individuals, but to a person who's injured, this load was too much, and that's why it didn't work. It's kind of like an example I often give. It's not appropriate, but we say, if you work really hard, you're going to get bigger and stronger. And then I say, well, if you ever read the history books and you went to a concentration camp and you look at those people worked hard every single day, and yet they were skeletons because they never had a day off. Whoever it was that was running the concentration camp worked them too hard. And so I did the same thing, actually. When I was trying out for the professional football team, I worked out every day because I wanted to get bigger. I was about 205 pounds. And I worked out, I did free weights on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. and I did machine weights, Nautilus, if you remember Nautilus machines. I did those Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And I ended up losing 7 pounds because I never gave myself enough rest. So I went into training camp at 198 pounds. And when I got cut and the summer ended, I ended up being 210 because I gave myself enough rest after the summer ended. So in terms of doses, again, depends what you need. When we talked about the push-ups before, I do push-ups every day, but I'm not breaking down much protein. So you have to consider how intense is your workout. You can run every day because you're not breaking down a lot of protein. It's an aerobic workout. But in terms of, and again, what are your goals? So I did another presentation one time on what's the minimum amount of work you need to maintain or increase your strength. And there's a number of studies out there that show that you can work out once a week, and do, like, let's say the typical 3 sets of 10, and you will maintain your strength for like 2 months. If you work out twice a week, you'll increase your strength over a period of time. So you don't have to do a lot of work to maintain or increase. And so if you're an athlete and you're a football player and you're busy with your competition from August till November, or well, especially in the States where you can play right into January, all you need to do is get one workout in the weight room a week and you'll maintain your strength. And then the off season, you go back to your 3 or 4 workouts a week to start building up again. So that's what you need for strength. Whether you're just want it for health, you can do it like once or twice a week. If you want to build up hypertrophy, for each muscle group, you're probably looking at 3 times a week. Now, what about balance? Are you breaking down any protein when you're doing balance? No. So you can do balance every day. It's very low intensity. When you're doing flexibility, are you breaking down protein? For the most part, no. Maybe if you're a gymnast and you're doing those crazy exercises where the coach is sitting on your back and you're trying to do the splits while you're doing that, you can cause damage there. And so that kind of high intensity flexibility program, that's where you might want to treat it like a weight training program and only do it every 2nd or 3rd day. And in between those days, do a light stretching activity. But for the average person who just goes to the point of discomfort or less than the point of discomfort, you can do it every day, but you don't have to do it every day. Again, we've looked at the research. Once or twice a week, flexibility, you're going to get a better range of motion.
I think a lot of people want to hear that. The biggest problem that people have for health-related physical fitness is it's hard enough to get you to do cardio, but then when we say, okay, now I want you to do 2 to 3 times a week of resistance training, 2 to 3 days a week of flexibility training, then people start going, oh, hold on now, this is really tough for me to do. And I think the biggest challenge that we have in health-related physical fitness is the resistance training side of it. Like you said, though, push-ups, pull-ups, you don't need fancy equipment. You don't need to go to the gym. You don't need to be doing these grunt workouts. You don't need to be doing 3 sets of heavy resistance once a week at the very minimum. How hard is it to do something like that? So that message really needs to get out there in terms of health-related physical fitness.
Yeah, and when you think of what motivates people, unfortunately, of course, in the past we'd say, a lot of women would be wrongly, what's the word I'm looking for, motivated by the pictures in magazines of these, ultra thin women and very unhealthy women. But men are influenced by that as well. We see the models; they've got the 6-pack. They're just stripped down with less than 5% body fat. Well, you're not going to get that by working out once or twice a week and doing 3 sets of 10.
Right.
But are they healthier than we are? No. You don't need less than 5% body fat to be healthy. We know that 15, 16% for a male, 20, 25% for a female is fine and is a very healthy category. You may not look like a professional model, but you're still going to live as long as you can possibly live because you're healthy. And like I said before, you don't need to bench press 350 pounds to live longer. You just need to be adequately strong.
Right. You talked about protein degradation. I think that's a really important concept of that ties into rest and recovery. And there's a
Mhm.
big trend nowadays with this recovery. And what is recovery? We have a whole other podcast that we did on just recovery by defining it. And rest is obviously probably the most important thing. And there are probably some of these hacks that we might be able to do to get to recovery. And I'll talk about that in a little bit with you. But I wanted to go back to the dose response real quick because another question that we have is about flexibility. And I know that you know a lot about stretching. So, and there's a lot of misinformation. What is our understanding of how long do we have to hold these stretches? How many times do we have to repeat them? What's the dose response there?
All right. So it depends. Again, are you stretching as part of your warm up, or are you stretching in a separate workout in order to increase your range of motion? So for the last 20 years, there's been a large reservoir of research out there saying that static stretching will impair performance. Well, you've got to be critical of the literature. You've got to look at the literature and see what they're actually doing. Some of the first studies, Fowles and Sale back in 2000, they did 30 minutes of stretching of the plantar flexors, and they found impairments. Well, who the hell does 30 minutes of stretching of the calves? Nobody stretches their calves for 30 minutes. And then I came along and I wasn't any better. I read their article and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to one up them. I'm going to do only 20 minutes and I'm going to do a different muscle group. I'm going to do the quads. Who does 20 minutes of stretching their quads? We found impairments. So I've written three or four reviews and just wrote another one this past year for the European Journal of Applied Physiology. And researchers are still doing too much stretching. So the number you want to keep in your head as part of your warm up is to do 60 seconds or less of static stretching and put that into a full warm up. So you want to do your initial aerobic activity, then you do 60 seconds or less per muscle group of static stretching, do some dynamic stretching, probably 5 minutes, and then your dynamic activity. So, you're a basketball player, you're going to go and start doing layups, foul shots, etc. Hockey player, passing, shooting on the goalie, etc. The research, for the most part, shows no negative effects on impairment. And if you're only doing less than 60 seconds of static stretching, in some research, you see an actual improvement in performance, again, within a full warm-up. So you might end up doing like 5 minutes of stretching, static stretching, if you're doing 60 seconds for the quads, 60 seconds for the hams, the calves, the shoulders, the groin. Okay, so there's like 5 minutes of stretching, but it's 60 seconds per muscle group. Now, what if you want to, you've got a restricted range of motion? Well, it's not the time to try and improve that before you step on the field or step on the court. That's kind of like saying, all right, I'm not strong enough, so I'm going to start doing bench presses and squats as part of my warm-up. Well, that's obviously ridiculous. You're going to go and do your squats and bench presses as a separate workout before or other than when you're going to go and compete or do your practice. So same thing with your flexibility. If you want to really improve your range of motion, then you do it as a separate workout. Then you can do more than 60 seconds. And the minimum would be at least 5 minutes overall. But I would suggest that even you're probably looking at a lot more than 5 minutes of stretching overall. But even then, when you're holding it, the research shows that if you hold your stretch for more than 30 seconds, 60 seconds at the most, nothing really happens after that period. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to hold the stretch for like 3 minutes, 30 to 60 seconds, go on to the next muscle, then come back again, do 2 or 3 reps of each muscle, maximum 60, and do your body, and that should be the proper dose.
That's great. Very helpful there. And you also mentioned warm up to stretch. Don't stretch to warm up, I guess. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that we're doing a little bit of activity before we stretch.
Absolutely.
Static stretching. So to allay any of these myths, this whole static stretching impedes performance is pretty much time dependent, and it's pretty safe to say that if we're stretching for less than 60 seconds, and as you said, it's really after 30 seconds, you don't get any benefit. So the short duration stretches are probably not going to affect our performance.
That's right.
Term.
And what you also find in the literature is that there's a whole bunch of problems. So like I said before, after you do your stretching, you should be doing your dynamic activities, basketball players, hockey players, etc., playing your sport. Then what happens? Then typically you go back into the dressing room and there's equipment fixing up. Your coach might give you a tactical or motivational speech. You go back out on the court. In some cases, depending on what level you're at, what country you're at, you might have to listen to the national anthem. So you're probably not going to start competing for 15 or 20 minutes after you've stretched.
Right.
But if you look at the literature, 95% of the literature tests a person within 5 minutes of stretching. So you almost never compete within 5 minutes of stretching. Another thing is that who are the people who are being tested in these studies? They're typically, because the studies are being done by sports scientists, kinesiologists, etc., they're using their students.
Yeah.
So all these students have read articles that said static stretching is bad for you. So they go in there and they have this mindset that static stretching is bad. So we did a study where we brought in non-sports, like we brought in the philosophy student, the sociology student, or whatever. We said stretching is great. Stretching is going to make you so strong, you're going to be Superman or Superwoman. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. But anyways, we did tell them it was great for them. And then we stretched them. And you can pretty well guess what happened. They had an increase in strength. They didn't have a decrease. They had an increase in strength because they thought that they were supposed to do that. There's another guy named Bertolacini did a very similar study. He didn't look at strength. He looked at fatigue endurance. When he told them that they would have more endurance, they had more endurance. Blažević down in Australia, he surveyed the people in his study, and he found that they were more confident in their performance if they stretched beforehand. So there's these psychological aspects as well that are very important when you come to think about, what kind of stretching routine am I going to do? And what am I telling my athletes? Yeah. You got to tell them I was going to say you got to tell them the truth. Maybe you don't know the truth because you've been overwhelmed by these studies that weren't properly conducted or ecologically valid.
Right. Ecologically valid. I love that statement. I use the word pragmatic sometimes, very practical. And that's another point that I'm making on these podcasts is the importance of being a good consumer of the literature and not just reading the last sentence of the abstract, right? Excuse me. But being able to look at these things and going, does this make sense? This whole 30-minute stretching, the break between the subjects, those are really important things that we need to take into consideration when we're using the literature for making our clinical decisions. Excuse me. So tell me, are there any other myths or misconceptions out there that we need to kind of talk about regarding these fundamentals?
Let me think here. Myths or misconceptions. Well, if we go back, for instance, to my velocity specificity work, back in the 90s, it was thought that in order to promote more power and strength at a fast speed, you had to move at a fast speed. Way back in 1993, when I published that article on the intent to explode, we found that it wasn't the movement speed, it was the message you're sending from your brain. And so what we did in that study was that we had people doing dorsiflexion with their feet. One foot, both feet were attached to a cybex or dynamometer. One foot didn't move at all. It was an isometric contraction. The other foot contracted at 360 degrees per second, so it moved very fast. Mm-hmm. So according to the literature at that time, this foot that was moving fast should have, after it was 16 weeks of training, should have got a lot stronger at fast speeds. This one that was isometric should have only got stronger at slow speeds. But the command that we gave those people was that we want you to explode into the device. So your intention is to contract as hard and as fast as possible. And after 16 weeks, what we found was that both the isometric and the isokinetic both had greater gains at fast speeds. So you've got to teach your brain how to explode, how to send down high frequency signals in order to have a rapid rate of force development. So you can still do heavy weights, like you can do heavy squats, heavy Olympic lifts, and because you're doing heavy work, the bar is going to move slow. But if you explode into that bar, then you're still going to teach your body how to explode and how to increase the rate of force development. So that'd be one myth.
Okay, keep going. These are great.
All right. Of course, when we're talking about balance, we talked about the Swiss balls and Bosu balls and things like that. And of course, balance is very important. And we in one study that we did with the children, we had kids doing plyometric training for 8 weeks. We had another group of kids do 4 weeks of balance training and 4 weeks of plyometric. So they did half as much plyometric training. You'd think if you did half as much plyometric training, you'd have half the results. But what we found was if you did balance training first, that you got the similar results as if you did 8 weeks of plyometric training. So you could reduce the volume of work because, of course, plyometric is a lot more stressful, than balance training. So therefore, you would think that, well, maybe, what I should be doing is practicing standing on Swiss balls, and that's going to really help me. Well, again, go back to training specificity. Do you ever stand on a ball on a basketball court? Do you ever stand on a wobble board on a soccer field? No, you're always moving. So balance is very important, but balance within the context of what you do is even more important. So you need to have dynamic balance for the most part. So of course, everything's a progression. So you can start people and do some progressive activities on wobble boards or Bosu balls, but you want to progress it to dynamic activity. And there's devices out there where they've got these kind of rubber mats that kind of give, and then you have to react to those rubber mats, or even just running on sand. Running on sand stresses the balance system. Mm-hmm. So like you mentioned in your introduction, if you want to get stronger and have balance, you shouldn't be doing a bench press on a Swiss ball because your forces drop so much that there's not enough stress in the body. You're not going to have that protein degradation we talked about before. So if you want to improve balance, go do some balance exercises. Just like I said before, if you want to improve range of motion, you got to go and do range of motion exercises, not as part of your warm up. It's something different. If you want to get stronger, you got to do it under mostly stable situations. But even think of it, if you're doing a squat and you got 200 pounds in your back, that barbell is moving. So it still forces you to have better balance. So Swiss balls can be handy because especially if you're just interested in fitness or wellness and you're afraid of benching 200 pounds, you can't bench 200 pounds or whatever, you don't like those big weights, you have a higher activation in your stabilizer muscles. So if I'm doing a bench press on an unstable environment, then my stabilizers in my shoulder and my trunk will be more highly activated than if I do it on a flat bench. So for the average individual, there's no problem doing some of your work on these unstable devices. But again, as an elite athlete, you've got to specialize. Balance workouts, strength workouts, flexibility workouts, you've got to focus on those areas alone, separately.
That's a great take-home message for this entire podcast, was those three fundamentals and making sure that we're taking the time working on those. But I wanted to back up real quick to your comment about the instability resistance training, because I always quote your article that you had written, that summary, because there was a lot back in those days of people. There were a lot of people that were doing bench presses on exercise balls. And I tell people it's okay. I mean, if you want to build strength in your extremities, you don't want to do it on a ball. But if you want to work out your core or these other stabilizing muscles, then the ball is okay to use with resistance, given the fact that you're not using the same levels of resistance as you would on a stable surface, because you just can't do it. So if you pull back on the resistance when you're using these unstable surfaces and you're not trying to build extremity strength, then it's appropriate to use that level of extremity resistance, or that lower level, to stimulate the stability training for that core area.
Yeah.
So,
and sorry.
Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, so again, if you are a baseline individual just interested in fitness, you only need, you can gain strength with 40% of your maximum lift. And basically, when you're doing your bench press on a ball, that's about all you're doing. You're doing like 40 or 50% of your maximum. Okay. So you can still get stronger if you are like at your baseline. But again, as an athlete, won't work.
Right. And then as we wrap up, I always like to tell the story of your interest in roller massagers, and how that came about, because we had been using rollers for years and years for flexibility and stuff like that. And I believe that when you had mentioned this earlier in the podcast, that you had seen these rollers and said, well, is there science behind it? And it was amazing that for 20 years, there was no research on it until you really looked at it. And one of the things, back to the myths, is the whole concept of this myofascial release. I hate when people call it that. I know you do too, because you know the truth. Because I want to set the record straight. Foam rollers, roller massagers do not stretch the fascia. They are not myofascial release. How do they work, Dr. Behm?
Well, yeah, that term, I wrote a whole article on why they shouldn't be called myofascial release. And so if you go back to one of the founders in the area, a guy named Robert Schleip from Germany, and he says that you, again, need to be Superman in order to actually release the myofascia. That the amount of forces that are exerted by the average person just aren't strong enough to release the myofascia. Mm-hmm. But you do find, if you use the rollers, that you get increases in range of motion. You typically don't get any performance decrements. And in fact, you can reduce pain. So like I say, how does it happen? Well, the first thing is changes in viscosity. The fancy word is thixotropic properties. So I know you're in Louisiana right now and you won't be able to relate to this, but if you lived in Canada in the wintertime and you're in, let's say, Edmonton, Alberta, and it's minus 40 degrees Celsius, which in fact, minus 40 degrees Celsius is also minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It's one point where the two tables meet. And you try to start your car is not going to start because the oil that's in the engine is so thick, it's like molasses, and the pistons can't move. So you have to go, and if you go to Edmonton, you look and you'd say, geez, I don't believe all these Canadians have electric cars because they all have cords in them. Well, not every Canadian has an electric car. The cord is attached to a heater that heats up the oil so you can start your car. So thixotropic properties for cars is if you heat up the oil, it becomes less viscous and more like, I don't know, ketchup than it would be like molasses. Well, that's a good example. Mm-hmm. Take a Heinz ketchup and take the top off and try and pour it. It won't come out. You got to hit it at the bottom and then it pours. So you can add heat or you can add a stress to the bottle and it becomes less viscous. Mm-hmm. So if we roll the muscle, there's going to be friction, which will cause heat, and there'll be stress. And so then you've got this less viscosity, there's less resistance with the tissues and the fluids in your system to allow you to have a greater range of motion. Another thing that happens is that what's called the sensory threshold or the stretch tolerance. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to reach out and I'm going to go as far as I can, I'm going to stop when it hurts. But if you put a stressful roller on it, you're going to feel some discomfort. Then you go through, various theories. There's the gate control theory of pain, where you've got fast and slow afferents coming up, and the fast afferents, being the ones from your touch receptors, your stretch receptors, may have a tendency to block the slower ones, the type 3 and 4s, which are the pain ones, and you have less pain. So the next time you do it, it doesn't feel as painful. You can go a little farther. There's also a top-down part of the gate control theory where some of that pain does get up there, and then the cerebral cortex will send down inhibitory signals. There's also this thing called the diffuse noxious inhibitory control mechanism. And in that case, again, you cause pain, sends a signal up, it goes to these neurons in your reticulum, and in the reticulum sends down endorphins and enkephalins, and those are morphine-like substances. So then your whole body becomes has an analgesic effect. There's less pain. You can go farther. So the two main things are viscosity, decreases in viscosity, and increases in the sensory threshold would be the two major ones that I would think of off the top of my head, allowing you to have a greater range of motion.
Yeah, and I think that the take home point I always made with that was these changes occur within 5 seconds. So it's more than likely some neurological change than any type of actual tissue stretching. And of course, as you mentioned, the heat, the thixotrophy, all those are great other reasons, and the diffuse noxious inhibitory aspects. But it's not just one thing. It's not just myofascial release, right?
Yeah, and it can't be myofascial release because we had two great studies. In one study, we're looking at pain. So we had a massage therapist identify tender spots in the calf. And what we did was we did 5 different conditions. But the important thing is we rolled that calf. In another condition, we applied massage, manual massage with our hands to the calf. Another condition, we rolled the opposite calf. And another condition, we did a control and we didn't do anything. We let them sit there. So if you roll the calf, pain went down. So you say, oh, well, we must be releasing the myofascia. When we massaged the calf, the pain went down. Oh, we must be releasing the myofascia. But we rolled the opposite calf, the contralateral calf. We didn't even touch the calf that was sore. The pain went down. How can you release the myofascia if you don't touch it? So there's a global response. And again, it goes back to those diffuse noxious inhibitory control or gate control theories. The whole body has reduction in pain and the pain goes down. So yeah, the myofascial release is not the main theory behind rolling.
I wouldn't say it's any theory behind it, but let's end. This has been obviously great. I love talking with you and talking science stuff and how we can apply it clinically. You're very, that research like the back of your hand. It's very good to have sports scientists like you that are on the front lines doing the practical research that that know how to apply it. And we just need to obviously do a better job to get the word out, which is one of the reasons why we do these podcasts. So as we end, I kind of like to talk about students and how they can learn from our experience as people that have been doing this for a long time. What advice do you give students who want to be able to get to the level where we are in terms of being a scientist or applying this type of research to actually make them the best at whatever they do in sports medicine?
Well, go back to what you said and don't just read the concluding sentence in the abstract. You've got to be critical and you've got to look at who are they examining. If the intervention on flexibility or strength training is with a bunch of NCAA Division I football linemen, it might not apply to you as a 125-pound average woman. So you got to look at it. One thing that I always say to my students, often my students will say, they'll read an article and they'll say, well, this article proves blah, 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 blah. And I stop them right there. And I say, that article proves nothing. You can't, an article does not prove anything. No. You need a field of literature and you have to replicate that. It's just like, vaccines. And I don't know how many years ago it was now, but that vaccine research that said that it'll give you autism. Yeah. It's never been replicated. Never been replicated. Right. So it proves nothing. It was one study. Scientists aren't perfect. And if you only have, in many of our studies, we might have 12 or 16 subjects, you can have anomalies happen and have like 8 or 9 people doing something that wouldn't occur if you had 100 people. So you got to be critical. Read, if you see one study that's interesting, well, keep it in the back of your mind, but you want to make sure you read other studies to see if that's backed up.
Right.
That would be my my advice.
Great. I appreciate that. That's one of the things I try to do every day with my students is to make them a little bit better. Like I said, consumers of the literature and then hopefully that will help them make better clinical decisions. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. This has been obviously a fun time for both of us. Always good to learn from you. So I appreciate everything you've done for me personally, as well as our profession. Thanks again.
Well, I appreciate the offer and great to be with you. Thanks again, Phil.
All right. Bye, everyone.